I want you to raise your hands if you believe you are empathetic. Keep your hands up if you believe that empathy is important for you to be good at your jobs. Now, keep your hands up if you'd still be empathetic towards a person who was found guilty of committing a serious offense. That's understandable. Empathy is a word that gets thrown around a lot, so much so that I think we can often forget what empathy really means, and that it doesn't always come natural or easy, especially towards those who are deemed the most dangerous in society. The issue is, empathy is hard to define. It's a personal mixture of sociology, psychology, and a learned response. We all struggle with it sometimes. I'm an occupational therapist with experience in both psychiatric and criminal justice settings. I've worked in prisons, hospitals, and community services, witnessing firsthand how to balance a healthy mindset of empathy when working in these complex workplaces. My job is to equip people with the skills that can make a significant addition to their life and improve their recovery. I help people develop healthy occupations, such as self-care, learning cooking skills, and engaging in creative activities such as art to channel that energy in a different way. Most importantly, away from crime. So, instead of hacking into air control, announcing a bomb hoax, which then results in grounding an airplane, yes, that's one of the many offenses I've come across. Those tech skills are instead redirected into becoming an app developer. David was a 23-year-old man that I met in prison. He had a love for electronics and cars. I kid you not, he could tell me in such specific detail how a Porsche 911 was built from start to end. I can never verify this, of course, because what do I know? David also avoided eye contact, found it difficult to communicate, and was always found by the nurses sleeping at the top of the bed, curled up in the ball, but knew every intimate detail of a car engine. You see, we suspected that he might be on the autistic spectrum and had sensory processing challenges. Often, neurodevelopmental conditions are left undiagnosed, and young adults are at most risk of not receiving this diagnosis, having most commonly slipped through the school education net. I regularly saw this health inequality in the people I met through the justice system. Prior to coming to us, David wanted to make friends. David had passed somebody on the street who smiled at him, so decided to take it upon himself to approach that person and start hugging them as a form of endearment. The person he hugged was a young woman who understandably was utterly terrified. You see, in David's eyes, he had misinterpreted the social cues and had taken someone smiling at him as a cue to approach them. But in the eyes of the law, this was classed as sexual assault. On his arrest, the police searched his internet phone history and saw numerous Google searches of how to talk to a person, how to let somebody know you like them, and how to be friendly. David's misinterpretation of a Google search landed him in a prison sentence. David is not alone. What's worse is that people like David are 3 times more likely to end up in prison and reoffend. Stories like these are not uncommon. According to the Prison Reform Trust, a high proportion of individuals who go through the criminal justice system have mental health needs, a learning disability, or a neurological disorder. I grew up in South London on an estate, a predominantly Black and ethnic environment where I was so used to seeing people walking up and down with some sort of mental illness. And I knew that deep down inside, the harsh realities ahead should they not have the right support systems in place. I remember I had a neighbor, a middle-aged Black man, who again I thought had some sort of mental health difficulty, but didn't know what exactly. But every single morning before I'd go to school, I'd see him standing by the bus stop, shouting at everyone who went past. If you'd listen closely, he was actually shouting, "Hello, how are you?" Right in people's faces. He had no clue about personal space. But even then, I knew it wasn't coming from a place of malice or trying to hurt me, but it was just the way his brain communicated with the world. The last time I saw him, he was surrounded by police and taken away in a van. You see, it's not just the justice system that has these disparities. Neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces are struggling to identify these differences at earlier stages and failing ethnic minority communities. Toby is another man that I met in prison. He had a love for electronics, and he was highly intelligent. He came to us from prison for an assessment. He had schizophrenia, and there was a query around whether he may be on the spectrum. His offense was armed robbery and assault. Now, that's a serious crime, right? And yet, Toby's personality was in stark contrast to the crimes he committed. He was on his way to study law until his mental health deteriorated. So you're probably wondering, how does such an intelligent man who's about to study law end up entangled in such violent crimes? Well, Toby was in fact a victim of mates crimes. Now, this is where criminals intentionally seek out those who are mentally vulnerable and exploit them for their own needs. You see, just like David, Toby also wanted to make friends, but ended up hanging around in the wrong crowds. Toby was intelligent, but he was also vulnerable, and was unable to recognize some of these signs due to his neurodiversity. As we got to know Toby, we realized that he was quite rigid to rules and would often get angry if other people broke them. To Toby, it mattered that his shoes were in order, toes pointing underneath the bed in color coordination. So we supported him with how to be more flexible and how to deal with all these changes. We also helped him to be more assertive so that he can no longer be a victim of mates crimes. We helped him get the right assessment so that he had a formal diagnosis of autism. We then made a case for Toby to be released into the community under forensic services. Toby is now well on his way training to become a library assistant under the watchful eye of the mental health services. He is a success story. Now, you may be wondering why an occupational therapist is working in the criminal justice system and thinking that a prison officer might be more suited to deal with these cases. But here I am, wearing my NHS rainbow-colored lanyard, strutting down the corridor, on my way to meet somebody who's committed an offense, but has also been brought to the criminal justice system, a prison, ready to be treated beyond their prison number and offense. I come to you with a story of hope. The Davids and Tobys of these worlds, they are redeemable. We as healthcare professionals hold such an awesome opportunity to see beyond those labels and to offer an alternative viewpoint. So, how far can your empathy go? The next time you see somebody acting out of the norm or displaying some of the traits that I mentioned earlier on, take a moment to pause and think about whether this may be more than what meets the eye. Don't hold a person hostage to their actions or choices made, especially at a time when there wasn't the right provisions in place. And lastly, be sure to identify when your emotional cup is maxed out. The same way you embrace empathy to others, be sure to extend it to yourself too. We can all channel empathy and potentially make a massive difference. Thank you.